I'm Catherine Whitney with Layla Emery, co-edited this book, My Shadow is My Skin, and I'm really happy to be here with all of you today. And I'm phoning in from Berkeley, California.
I'm Layla Emery, and I'm co-editor of My Shadow is My Skin with Catherine 2015, and it's just such a pleasure to be able to have it out in the world, and we're very grateful to our authors and to about this opportunity to do reading and have a chat.
I'm Laura. I'm the publishing fellow at the University of Texas Press, and I've been doing some of the publicity work for My Shadow is My Skin, and so it's very nice to finally see people in person or on a screen, put voices and names to faces. And I guess I'll be helping to kind of moderate this discussion throughout.
Hi, my name is Dema. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm one of the contributors from My Shadow is My Skin. I have an essay in there that I wrote about being queer and Iranian and how those two intersections come together. And I'm also phoning in from Berkeley, California today.
Hi, I'm Darius. At Peckham. I'm also a contributor to My Shadow is My Skin, and I'm so excited to be here. I am an essayist and a poet, and am a freshman at Harvard University, which is currently happening on Zoom as well. So this is kind of cool. I'm already pretty hip to it, and I'm from Huntington, West Virginia, so I'm in West Virginia right now.
I'm Siamak Bosohi, also a contributor to My Shadow is My Skin. And I want to say thanks first off to Layla and Catherine. This is the first time I've had a chance to say thank you in close to person together. And also to Bailey and Laura and everyone at UT Press for putting this together. Very excited to be a part of the conversation, and I am calling from Seattle.
Catherine asked if I could share some of the reasons why the University of Texas Press decided to acquire your book and publish it. And hearing from the acquiring editor, because I wasn't here at the time, I'm new, but also temporary status. Hearing from him, Jim Burr, on the decision to get in touch with you and to acquire My Shadow is My Skin, it kind of seemed like a no-brainer. He had met Persis at the Middle East Studies Association meeting a couple of times and had talked with her about the possibility of a kind of volume like this. And then he said that he was able to meet with Catherine and Layla about the various stories that would be presented in the volume. And he was very excited about that. He is always on the lookout for stories of underrepresented groups. He's acquired previous texts on the Iranian diaspora. And so when he was given the opportunity to publish a volume of nonfiction creative stories, he jumped at that opportunity, especially given the current political landscape. He thought that this was a very important volume to get out and contend with different notions that are present, especially within the American political sphere. And I think that on a personal note of having read the volume, that the variety of stories that are offered within this volume really speaks to every aspect of American and Iranian life that really does provide the opportunity to challenge a lot of the discriminatory beliefs that are often presented about Iran and Iranians and the diaspora.
Sure. I think that's a great summary. I mean, that piece of representing underrepresented culture, voices, and also we felt strongly in this volume to include a combination of people, of writers who were emerging and established, because we felt like the more different voices and different perspectives we could get out there, the better, because it's really what we wanted to emphasize was not just the human stories, but the diversity of stories coming from this population. And Layla and I got a chance to really think about how we were part of this new diaspora. I mean, it's not something that I had ever really thought of myself being part of as an American, born in America, but having married into an Iranian family and really taken on the culture, I came to understand through this process, the writing workshop that we took together in 2015, and then the putting together of this book, that the diaspora is really the net is very wide, and we wanted to reflect that in the writings as well.
I agree. And I think another really important goal of ours was to try to capture stories that haven't been told before by Iranians. I'm thrilled about it. And I think a few of the readings fall beautifully into that category. So we feel very, very lucky.
So I think from here, we were going to have the contributors supply about approximately 5-minute reading of from their stories. So I'm not sure who would like to go first. Maybe Dena?
This is an excerpt from my essay called Pushing the Boundaries. This essay was written in 2015. And so it's been about 5 years now, but I still think it's a really important piece. Coming out is not a singular process, ever. You can never do it just once, because with heteronormativity, everyone assumes you're straight. Coming out to my mom in 2009 was only the beginning. Since then, I have constantly come out about my queerness to strangers on the street, cashiers taking my coffee order, holding my wife's hand, or before I was married, when I first met people and they assumed the fiance I spoke of was male. Now it's always an act of coming out when I say my wife, and there's no misunderstanding anymore about the differences between girlfriend and fiance. This protracted coming out also translates to my extended Iranian family. I remember constantly checking in with my parents about which aunts and uncles I could be honest with. And however, they're not actually related to me by blood. When my parents first immigrated to America in the early 1980s, fresh off the heels of the Islamic Revolution in Iran, they each heard about the thriving Persian expat community in Northern California. When they met at a wedding in Oakland in 1986, their individual journeys converged. Settling here in California, they imported a desire to belong to the type of community an Iranian village provided for them back home. These women and men raised me and looked after me as I grew up, gave me advice when my parents couldn't, and tried to prevent any boys from breaking my heart. Does Amomedi know? I asked my father once about one of my uncles, unrelated by blood, but knit into our family by distance and circumstance. Does Arya? Does Holstrom? Persians like to talk. Even though I didn't speak with my extended family often and knew that they were too polite to say anything to my face, they likely already knew this piece of family gossip and had said something to my parents. They were more proficient in Farsi than I was, with an American accent being the family joke. I spoke Farsi like a Turk. My dad said I tried the time I tried to say Sofra Akht, the wedding altar set up in front of a bride and groom, with the targ sound not found in English. My communication with my extended family had all but ceased because of my discomfort with the language and lack of understanding of what my family was saying around me. Amomedi knows, Khosrow knows, Arya knows. My dad rattled off a list of my extended family in Northern California. A prickly hot cold feeling came over me. The only person I'd taken the time to tell directly was my Uncle Rasul, who embraced me with open arms and understood completely. The reality that my entire family knew about me and my life without my consent felt terrifying. Surely nothing was amiss because my dad said all of this so nonchalantly. It's a different country, a different culture, he said. We have to adapt. This sentiment made me want to protest. I would have been just as queer growing up in Iran, albeit much more closeted. My bisexuality wasn't an American influence. It was part of me. That would have been the same in Tehran or San Francisco. Yet my father's words sowed seeds of doubt. Adaptation can also feel like assimilation. At times, it feels like my relationship with Diana is proof of how far I've strayed when it comes to growing up in America. Here I am, married to a white woman from Texas, whose heritage is as Middle American as you can get. Would I have these same feelings if I was born and raised in Iran? Would my queerness have spurred me to leave the country as my parents' political beliefs had them? Tracing these threads sometimes seemed as if I could unravel my sense of being Iranian, especially when my dad would reassure me that I was a child of America, not Iran. However, if that were true, the diaspora wouldn't be calling me as it is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dana.
Right.
So Darius, would you like to go next?
Sure. So I'm going to read an excerpt from the essay in the book and then a poem. Primarily, I'm a poet, but when I was approached about this collection of essays, I really wanted to be part of it. So I wrote an essay, but kind of like not really, because I just took a bunch of my poems and took out the line breaks and then expanded it, which is like cheating. But I think that after a lot of revision with Leela and Catherine, that it became something that I'm really proud of. Just a little backstory: my Iranian heritage, for a lot of my childhood, was kind of a yearning for it. My mom passed away when I was little, and kind of with her was my direct tie to Iran and its culture. So the piece is called Learning Farsi. Almost every year, Bibi set up a haftseen, a traditional Nowruz table adorned with the many Iranian symbols of renewal, love, and beauty. She told me many stories about the beauty of my great-grandmother's table in Iran, all of the 7 requirements accounted for while we watered the sabzi and covered it with a wet cloth for the night. I was always amazed by how fast the sabzi grew, tall sprouts of wheatgrass shooting out of the seeds by the second day of nurture, full and thick like Iranian hair. On the 13th day of growth, we'd drive out to the river in the woods where they used to throw the sprouts with my mother. Bibi turned in her seat and telling me stories of Emu Nowruz, or Uncle Nowruz, Santa's Iranian counterpart, my eyes wide with the fantasy. Papa would laugh along with her. When I was 7, Bibi was the first person to tell me that Emu Nowruz and Santa weren't real, a heartbreaking moment of truth for me. At first, I refused to believe her. Believe what you will, she said to me and shrugged. It's reality. When she told me this, I thought of what had happened the last time we threw the sabzi in the river, the clump flying through the wind, settling on top of the water, and rushing away. She'd said, Dada, quick, make a wish to Emu Nowruz. And I had. When we got home, a present was sitting in the living room. I cried with joy. I believed. One night recently, while watching Donald Trump in a press conference, Papa slammed the remote control on the table. Stupid son of a bitch, he said, and struggled to get up from his chair. Sometimes, when he drives, Papa will mutter strung together Farsi words under his breath. Zakhrem mor pedar sag, he'll say, and blush after, as if embarrassed that he'd ever said such a thing. With some careful probing, I once got him to tell me what this particular curse meant. Snake poison to your face, father of dog. We laughed hard while I said it over and over in Farsi, a young child cursing everything and nothing all at once. Although I've never been there, I yearn for Iran. After my great-grandmother passed away, I felt profound guilt for never having gone to visit her. For the times when I'd complained about talking to her on the phone, the language barrier being a problem I felt I would never conquer. When I was 14 years old and Bibi called to tell me the news of her death, I was dumbstruck. The United States suddenly felt smaller to me. I felt trapped. I wished silently, as I used to when I was little and we threw the sabzi in the river, that I could go to Iran or somewhere else and feel free. I thought of the balloons that we let go in memory of my mother and brother each year that tossed about and flew in the air with ease, and wondered if they popped and fell back to earth, if someone found them and read the attached notes, wondering where they came from. I listened to Bibi's weeping, the phone digging into my cheek, her voice echoing in my head. Azizam, I wish you could have met her. The next thing I'm going to read is a poem that I wrote recently. I wrote it actually on the anniversary of my mother and brother's death this year. And it's called About Blueberries, February 7th, 2020. Just minutes before the anniversary, I'm inexplicably thinking about blueberries and the evening of my lover crushing some with her teeth. Golru in Farsi is flower face, lacking equivalence. I've seen many things I haven't seen, like a man sanitizing his utensils methodically with an onion on Valiestra Street in Tehran, like the swift openings of many fruits. So yes, I am thinking about lifespan. Under ideal conditions, a blueberry bush lives 60 years. The way my mother was, maybe, half-life of a blueberry bush, crown jewel of Iran, first masterpiece of God, green stars like crown and eyes, dark sheen before ruin. In Iran, there is no good word for blueberry. In the soil there, this fruit is nearly impossible, and so, since there is not much of a place to go, I look between my lover's teeth, and as I see it in these moments, there are worlds and universes and little blue pieces of flesh like night. It is just comfort, and I am just thinking. I am always thinking. There is only so much of life to live, only so much time before, under ideal conditions, so much, only so much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Guess we can move to Siomak.
Okay. All right. Well, kind of like Darius, I am not primarily a nonfiction writer. I'm mostly a short story writer, but I have also always felt that there's a blurry line between fiction and nonfiction, and it's nice to kind of go back and forth. So the piece that I wrote is called The Iranians of Mercer Island, which is the town that I grew up in for most of my childhood, nearby here in Seattle. And just to give a brief context, the question that I was trying to deal with in the piece was about being a small community within a larger community, what that meant for us as Iranians growing up there, and whether that meant we had something tighter within our small community than I saw on the outside, and how much we were supposed to go back and forth. These are all the questions I had. So, all right. Little by little, we began to see that the place we could have here was the place we could make for ourselves. It meant that who you were had to emerge. We owed it to one another. I owed it to the Iranians to try out for the basketball team, even though I got cut every year, because if I did make the team, there would be an Iranian name on the back of one of the high school jerseys. Then nobody could say that we weren't a part of that place. We had a chance to show them what Iranians were, but this meant that first we had to know ourselves. I didn't know how we were supposed to do that when even the air I breathed was American before it was mine. But I breathed it in deeply until I knew that that wasn't true. It was mine before it was American. It needed a boy to breathe it in before anything else. It needed a boy the same way that the evening sky needed a boy to dream under it, and the stars needed a boy to wonder at them. America needed me, I thought. It didn't always know it, but in its quiet moments, it did. And it needed the Iranians to sing long into the night. It didn't know it needed that at all, but we did. I didn't know how we knew, but I would listen to the singing and tell myself to remember that there was a secret knowledge in the world, something that wasn't seen in the rush of the day. But the next morning, I would wake up and it would seem like the only thing secret was wondering and asking again. I didn't know how to bring that secret part of myself together with the part that knew something for sure. If I had Iran the way they did, I thought, then I would know it. I would know what longing really was. The singing always sounded very sad to me. It was the only time that I saw people making room for sadness together. In America, sadness seemed like an individual's road, and I tried to make the street behind our house that ran along the school and the fields my version of it. It was good to have a street like that. I'd walk up and down it, thinking of the American girl in my class and whether she could really help me love as much as it seemed like she could. I'd come home and my mother and father would ask me what I was thinking about, but they wouldn't ask me what was wrong because the memory of the last time there had been singing in our house was still within them. They knew there was plenty that was wrong if you wanted to look at it that way. You were stuck in the business of living, and maybe that meant you were stuck living far from home, or maybe it meant you were stuck living in a world that felt too small at some times and too big at others. But either way, there was a respect for sadness because we couldn't know ourselves without it. So I listened and thought of all the things that wouldn't keep going here in America. There were a lot of them, and most of them I didn't even know yet. The Iranians knew it. They didn't expect us to carry on everything. The best we could do was to be quiet when they sang, which we were. Then we would joke with one another about their extended goodbyes, full of bows and ceremony, knowing somewhere inside of us that their goodbyes would last longer than our joking. They would still have the last word. We had to joke because it softened the edges of the two sides we sat upon. Those two sides were far apart most of the time, but they were close when we were all together. And those sides were close inside me when I walked along that street behind our house. I just didn't know how they could ever be close in a way that was meant for all the world to see, like the way it could be seen in the Iranian singers. Even an American could hear the sadness of their singing. I saw it firsthand the night that the singing got too loud and one of our neighbors called the police. He was a lonely American cop who knocked on our door late at night. My father told him that we would sing more quietly, and then it felt too impolite to just send him off into the night. So my father invited him in to have some tea and listen to the singing. I was thrown for a loop because I thought that one way to be Iranian in America was to be against the agents of state control. But my father, who knew much more about agents of state control, didn't care about all that and brought him in and gave him a place to sit. The Iranians of Mercer Island were very happy. It was a chance to show their lives, to show that whatever else the cop thought Mercer Island was made of, it also had this, Iranians singing in the night. It was a part of Mercer Island the Iranians had always known. They were introducing the cop to his own town, the quiet town he had been patrolling at night. I was going to have to find something more when it came to being Iranian in America than just being against the agents of state control. You see, my father told him, the singing is sad because we miss our country. I can see that. It is sad. Yes, my father smiled and the Iranian smiled as if to say, tell us what you are sad about. Thank you, the cop said. I hope you can come again, my father said. Thank you, the cop said again. Hopefully it won't be because you have been singing too loud for the neighbors. My father smiled and shrugged. Yes, you see, he said, we forget when we sing. The Iranians had something, to not only sing, but then to invite in a cop called to stop the singing and have him listen to more, albeit quieter singing. We were seeing something of their lives too. We were seeing how something hard could also have moments of being very easy. They started saying their elaborate goodbyes again, but we didn't joke about them. We were only kids, but we were starting to pay attention to what lasted and what did not.
Thank you so much. So I guess we'll get into the more discursive based element of this session. So my initial question is for Catherine and Layla in how they decided to organize this volume, and how did you determine who should contribute, or how did you find the writers to contribute to this volume?
Just before I start, I just want to say how amazing it is to hear you all read your pieces, because Layla and I have been sitting with these pieces, some of them for years, and reading them over and over and over again, but to hear them come out of your mouths is like such a gift. So thank you for that. Really, they are, I mean, I'm sure you agree, Aunt Layla, I mean, they're animated and there's so much love. So thank you, I appreciate that. The process was a long one. And as you know, it started in this workshop that Layla and I took together on Iranian identity. And then the first thing we did was put out a call for submissions in a few literary venues and the places that we thought would be a good place to attract submissions. And then we were so excited that we got any submissions at all. Like, people really have, and then we got a lot of submissions. And then our idea of it really shifted over time. So we didn't really know what we had no idea what we were doing. And I think that Persis kind of handed us this project. Persis and Karim and Anita Marizvani were the instructors for this really incredible writing workshop. And Persis sort of singled Layla and me out and said, do this. And we're like, okay, because we didn't really know what was involved. So I would say we were really learning on the job. And we got a bunch of submissions and we just sort of read them, and we had a sort of a moving in and out group, and it really they were influenced by each other. So the things that we had to end up cutting didn't necessarily mean they weren't good. It just meant they weren't, working with the bigger picture. And then we also, following that, we started getting really curious about who was out there writing about this. And so we would approach, many times we approached writers whose work we really liked. And sometimes they wrote a piece for us, when we asked them, and sometimes they would give us a piece that had already been published, which is why some of these, there's a selection of pieces in the book that are previously published pieces. But we thought that those really added to the conversation in an important way. Layla, you have anything to?
I would say that because we didn't set out with a specific goal of, okay, this is the type of writing we'd like to see. I think we had some idea of what we're drawn to, certainly, but the process was, as Catherine said, very organic. And once we started to realize that the submissions we were receiving were as wonderful as they were, the selection process became more difficult. But with that, it also became more illuminating in the sense that Catherine and I began to realize, okay, we can organize this collection thematically, which I don't think we initially set out to do, but all of the pieces, ways one could argue that all of the pieces could, or rather any of the pieces could fit into any section of the book. And that's really exciting, I think, because it means that I think the collection as a whole, it's asking important questions, and it's providing important answers to a lot of questions that I think have been raised over time with regard to what is the diaspora, what does it mean to be part of the diaspora in this moment in the 21st century. And as I was mentioning previously too, with regard to the themes that began to emerge, we saw just the incredible bravery of really all of the authors as far as the themes that they were delving into. In some cases, these were really painful memories that the authors were hearkening back to, and that was very meaningful to us. And I think that when people read the collection, they'll be inspired by that and really moved by it.
Yeah. Can I just pick up on one thing that Layla said? There are a lot of taboos. You know, Iranians came. We started sort of focusing on, backing up. We got a big pile of pieces that were really set in that the leaving from Iran in 1979 and coming with that. Well, there was trauma, and there were certain relationships that people didn't really want to talk about. And Layla and I personally, I think, both have that in our families. You know, there's certain things, you know, doors that don't open. And we found that, picking up on what you said, Layla, we found that people were really willing to open some of those doors and talk about some of these things that aren't really talked about generally in public with amongst Iranians. And that was super exciting for us to kind of like, let's go in this direction, because it just seemed new and really relevant and really modern. And so that was exciting.
Go
And
for
one
it.
other thing I wanted to say about that was the fact that we received so many submissions from writers who were kind of going outside of their preferred genre. If you actually, I think what writers like that, have two poets and a fiction writer writing nonfiction, I think is really exciting. And in fact, I don't have a hard number for you, but I would say many of the writers in the collection were writing outside their preferred genre. I think it means that we're seeing how interesting creative nonfiction can be, and that there are elements of poetry and there are elements of fiction in the sense with full accuracy. And that was a really lovely thing that began to emerge. And again, it really helped us kind of categorize.
I think we lost the last word that you said. It helped you categorize, I think. Categorize the themes, the stories.
Correct. Exactly.
Yeah, so kind of combining that point, where do you see this volume within the world of creative nonfiction? What do you think that this offers to interested readers who tend to go for creative nonfiction?
I think people are used to memoir, and memoir has been a popular genre for a long time. And although these pieces aren't memoir necessarily, I think that they're accessible in that way. People are interested in reading about other people's lives, even if those people are, well, we hope anyway, even if those people are different, have different backgrounds. And so the fact that I think people are already interested in that means that these essays will, I think, be of great interest. And certainly, Catherine and I have talked about this at length, the fact that, let's say, a largely American audience maybe has never read writing by Iranians before, or this type of writing by Iranians. Maybe they're familiar with reading Lolita in Tehran, for example, but this is something different, and we really wanted to push the boundaries in so many ways. I think that the collection does that really beautifully.
I think, I think this is interesting because I was like in my head, like justifying kind of how do I how do I send this in as nonfiction if really it's a lot of essentially prose poems that have been expanded. And I think that actually, like, you know, my mom was a poet. My grandmother isn't a poet, but she writes poetry. And all of the Iranians I've ever met really feel poetic to me. And that might be an extension of, you know, the culture that is so steeped in Rumi and Hafez and Farouk and those, you know, those incredible poets of Iran. But also, I think it really is just part of the culture. It's part of the people's nature in Iran is poetry. And I think that all translated works that I've read, even fiction, nonfiction, have felt extremely poetic in their nature, and dense and mythic and necessary. So I think for me, like, you know, when my understanding of Iran was from Rumi, from my mom's poetry, from my grandmother's poetry, from you know, just all those poetic conventions that really color life in Iran, that as a person living in America, it felt actually completely right to write my memoir nonfiction as kind of these poetic forms.
Layla, maybe you would want to say something about we had these conversations about the possibility that a book, you know, the collection could be a kind of between genres piece, and that how we sort of struggled with that in terms of our understanding of the publishing world, because it's really harder to sell a book that doesn't confine to, you know, anthology or nonfiction or memoir. But we, because at first we had poetry in as a you know, interleaved between the essays, and we didn't in the end have enough poetry to make it make sense as a whole volume. But it was interesting to try to find that continuum of kind of truth in what nonfiction is, and also incorporate all these different ways of writing, like Siamak, to have something that's, you know, a voice that's really more grounded usually in fiction and short storytelling. And we had a couple, Persis also was a poet. So, you know, that if you have anything to add to that, Layla.
Yeah, that was certainly a challenge for us. You know, how do we decide what is, like, how do we draw those lines? And to me, the best nonfiction has elements of poetry in it. And maybe that's because I'm biased and I am a poet primarily as well. But to Darius's point, I feel like some of the best writing has that lyrical quality, that poetic things. Writer, for example, to bring some of those skills to bear as far as dialogue is concerned and describing memories. Because again, you know, how perfect are our memories of things that happened to us 5, 10, 15, 20 or more years ago. And fiction writer, you know, even though it was really difficult to kind of draw that line and say, okay, I think we need to focus on nonfiction. I think the collection in some ways is stronger because it's kind of in some ways cross-genre without being cross-genre, if that makes sense.
Often the narratives that we get about the Iranian diaspora in the US, I think focuses on kind of prosperity narratives. So we often think of LA Iranians, Shahs of Sunset is what is often marketed to non-Iranians in the US. And I'm wondering, from you all, various contributors, how you view your stories as offering something new to explain your own experience within the diaspora.
I can start with that one. I know for me personally, I had an interaction with Azar Nafisi, who is the writer of Reading Lolita in Toronto at the Texas Book Festival in 2015. And I was really like trying to engage with like my heritage in a way that I hadn't as an adult. And she told me the best thing you can do is to read, and gave me like the name of a bunch of publishers as well. And so I spent most of 2016 reading a lot of Iranian literature written in English and published for an American audience. And I very much I didn't see myself reflected whatsoever. And that was primarily why I submitted an essay to the call for submissions for, at the time it was called Iran Musings, and really feeling like, yeah, I didn't have this when I was growing up either. Like when I was like 15 years old, I didn't see myself reflected in the type of literature about like young immigrants or the children of immigrants within any particular diasporic context. And it was really lonely. And so that's primarily what I wanted to do, was to try to carve out that space for myself that wasn't really there previously. And also how, when we're talking about prosperity narratives and like what representation Iranians do get, it does come from a more higher class perspective, because those are the people that have access to publication points, who also have the way of money to be able to have additional resources to actually write these types of things. Both of my parents come from Shiraz and Abadan in Iran. I don't remember reading a lot of narratives from people from those areas back in 2016. I read a lot of narratives that were written by people who were from Tehran or for Hom, or more from the northern part of Iran. And so I never really even saw like our family reflected in what narratives we had available in America. And so that was something that I was really heavily trying to remedy in my writing. And even now, when it comes to like the YA like books that are being published now about Iranians like growing up in America, I'm still not really seeing that. And so I'm going to move forward with other writing projects that remedy that as well.
I'll jump in. Yeah, that's a really great question, Laura. And I feel like sometimes, especially for maybe for older generation Iranians, or ones who, were coming over in the 70s and the 80s, sometimes it feels like the dark underbelly of the prosperity narrative is a kind of grateful to be here narrative, which is very one-dimensionalizing, and it's actually like really just has very little to no place in art or fiction, in my opinion, because it's just very simple. And like there's a temptation, I think, to swing all the way in the other direction and make for my family, like our political way of being Iranian, what in terms of like, I mean, this is handed down from my parents, in terms of having a critique of American empire. That was our main way of being Iranian. So I almost feel like that was, even as much as the culture and the language played a significant part as well, but the politics really dominated, and that's a side of the pendulum that I didn't want to swing all the way towards either, because for me, like growing up, like I was confused about things like, how do I reconcile my parents' critique of America with my love for Jack Kerouac and Walt Whitman, like that was, and so there were no easy answers to that either. But I think that, that's where things get interesting, and that's what the book does, that I think is so interesting, is it just is trying to wrestle with all those questions at once. Yeah, so that's what I appreciate about the collection.
Yeah, I think for me it was for me for a lot of my childhood I felt as though my my connection to Iran was a tenuous one. That I didn't feel like I had the license to write about Iran because I'd never been there. I hardly spoke the language, and I was only half. And that was um, for a long time. It really drove me to write about Iran in a way that probably wasn't very genuine because I was stubborn and I was trying really really hard to be a part of that culture that I really wanted to be in, and not really having the ability to get there or to even like just talk about my experiences yet. But I think that a big part of for me like that justification was just allowing myself to be an Iranian American writer and to write the things that I was interested in without forcing myself to imagine what it's like, at the base of the mountain of Daman, or whatever. And a lot of my work now is I find the culture and what I learn about Iran and everything just bleeds into it. And I find that the Iranian culture that is a part of me is just as stubborn um as my feeling of I don't have a place in it. And it's I'm lucky. I got to go to an AUP reading when I was 15, which had Persis Karim and Jasmine Darznik and Sholeh Wolpe, and they're all kind of like heroes in the Iranian diaspora to me, because right after the reading they came up to me and asked me questions and just made me feel for the first time a part of that literary community, and made me feel like I had a place to write about my specific experience, which was tenuous and which was far away, and said that was important. So that was really important for me.
So, do you think that these stories are particular to an American experience of diaspora? Do you feel that Iranians in diaspora who live in Europe or Latin America, or other parts of Asia, might feel some sort of resonance with this project?
I think that was our hope, certainly. And while it's difficult to speak to those specific experiences of what it's like to be part of, one shared element of that is sometimes feeling in that liminal space between two cultures. And that theme, I think, is reflected in many of the pieces in this collection, to varying degrees. And I think it just depends person to person. Some people, I think, feel like they're squarely in the middle, maybe neither here nor there in a way. Some people, others rather, I think, are more comfortable fully embracing one side of their culture than the other, whether that's their new country or the one that they were born in or where their parents were born in. And that, answers, and that's a really interesting thing to explore in writing. And I love that the collection does that.
And I would add that I think there is something unique about the relationship between Iran and America that is very, goes back to that political and historical, and that there's a level of tension between countries politically, and something that immigrants from Iran had to deal with. And then, it's sort of having, what's interesting to me is that, my husband came when he was 15 and he had to assimilate as a teenager and as an Iranian, sort of assimilate into this country at a time when the hostages were being held. And he wanted to be more American, and he really did he did such a good job of it. I barely recognized him as Iranian, when he got married. But my daughter in the next generation is like, I want to be more Iranian. I don't look Iranian enough. I want, and she feels sort of not discrimination is too hard a word, but she feels a little bit as an outsider in the gatherings that are fully Iranian. So that there's that, I think that assimilation and the walking on both sides happens in all countries, whether there is a diaspora. I think that one in particular is heightened because of our political relationship. And then that carries on to today. Why one reason we thought this collection was so timely was because of the bellicosity in our, between our leaders on both sides, and that it gets, the depiction of Iranians, Iranian Americans becomes very monolithic. And we felt like this is a book where you really see so much nuance and real human stories, and that was important. So
I think we're running out of time, unfortunately. I think that this conversation could go on for much longer than this. So I kind of want to leave on a more hopeful and happy note. The book came out on March 16th, and that was immediately before Nowruz. I guess with all of the COVID-19, all of the stress and fear around that, how have you celebrated the publication of this book, and how did you celebrate Nowruz, if you could, if you were able to in any small way this year?
I joined a Zoom celebration for Nowruz that was organized by some friends of mine. It was all Iranian queers, and it was the first time that I had taken part in that and participated in that, and it was really gratifying. And then to the point where, we were all comparing our half scenes to each other and being like, I couldn't get this, I could get that, but not this. And then someone even said how her sister called it a char scene, like a 4 scene instead of like a 7 scene. And then actually I ended up not being able to go to the market to get my own supplies. So I painted a half scene. So I was inspired by Catherine's essay that she wrote about her daughter painting a half scene, a traveling half scene. So I was really inspired by that, and I cribbed off of that.
I had big plans of jumping over a candle, but they didn't come to pass. Mostly I just am putting it off till next year. I talked to some relatives. I tried to remember the relatives that my parents would have called, and gave them a call, and all over the country. So that was the big one. And in terms of the book, we were trying to get something going with the University of Washington Near East Studies department. I have a friend who's a professor there. It's still in process. We're hoping for something in September, maybe, once the world recovers from everything.
I think just for me was kind of the acknowledgement of warm weather. I've been in Boston for the last year, and it's cold. And for me, what Nowruz means is this warmthening of the world and of the natural. I've been writing a lot of poems at home, and just trying to keep in contact with my grandparents as much as possible, talking to them. And we usually spend Nowruz together, my grandparents and I, as I write in the essay in the book. It's kind of like they get that holiday with me. It's like my parents are like, all right, that's that's Iranian, that's yours. And it's it was sad, but it was also good to be to have this, especially this anthology, to flip through and work through my during my march while it got warmer, and just doing all the things that you can do when you're in isolation, and and still feel part of that Iranian wider community.
I mean, we there's a huge Charge Anniversary celebration in Berkeley that had to get postponed or canceled outright, and I think there was, for my family, we were spread out. My kids weren't around, but I know they were jumping over. There's candle jumping, and then we actually had a multiple FaceTime call on New Year's with my mother-in-law, who's been sequestered in Iran for 6 weeks. I mean, she's older, so she was really being careful. So, but she cried. Like you can imagine an Iranian grandmother just like seeing all her family in little squares on her iPad. It was really lovely. So. Yeah, so that was both, sort of technology meets the virus. So
I usually spend Nowruz with my parents, who live about 30 minutes from me, and they're older, and I've been trying to be very cognizant of social distancing. And so while I was heartbroken to not be able to spend this New Year's with them, we did speak on the phone. I spoke to some other relatives. And in addition to that, I think it's been lovely to celebrate the debut of the book at this particular time. It seems so fortuitous, oddly enough, that it would come out so close to Nowruz. And in some ways, that all of this other stuff is happening that's so beyond our control. What we are seeing in response to that is just this incredible response to these stories, to these authors, to the book as a whole, and just the communities that have really embraced this. And I think one wonderful thing that has come out of this situation is the fact that people are finding ways to celebrate virtually, or allow people to feel less alone. And that has certainly helped me this year. So I feel very privileged to be part of this community, and I hope all of our authors do as well.
It's been an absolute delight to get to hear you read your stories, and it's been an honor and a privilege to be able to talk with you all about this project that has been absolutely so meaningful, and I think will hopefully bring a lot of people joy during this very stressful time. So I want to thank all of you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good office.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.